Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for this session entitled Supporting You and Your Mental Health. My name's Arron Hutchinson and I'm joined by my colleague Tracy Bowyer, and we are going to be talking through this topic today. We both work for the ADHD Foundation Neurodiversity Charity, and we're delighted to be hosting this session in partnership with the Witherslack group. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, we're actually going to be focusing on something called parental anxiety, because I think a lot of the sessions that we deliver, we do very much focus on how to look after our children and young people in terms of their well-being, but actually sometimes it's important to make sure we are looking after ourselves as well. So what we are going to do is explore and understand what parental anxiety is, and we're going to look at some common triggers and worries, and perhaps you might relate to some of those. And then we're going to look at loads of strategies to kind of support and manage that when we are feeling those heightened responses and we are feeling that anxiety. What can we do to help ourselves to calm and feel a little bit better? So before we go into parental anxiety specifically, I just wanted to talk very briefly about what anxiety itself is before we go into that specific. So the best way of describing it, and you may well have heard this example before, but it kind of gives us an idea of where it comes from. So imagine you're a caveman or a cavewoman. There's danger around every corner. You constantly have to be on high alert, because every time you're out and about, there could be a saber-toothed tiger, there could be something else waiting to to cause you danger. So what happened was in terms of our evolution, we developed a very comprehensive alarm system. Now, this is called our amygdala, and it sits in the limbic part of our brain, which is basically like the emotional hub of our brain. Now, what happens is when we sense danger, that amygdala triggers a response, and we often call this our fight, flight, or freeze response. You may well have heard about this before. So in this kind of example, it might be that you actually need to fight the danger to protect yourself. Flight would mean that you need to run away, so your body's preparing you to do a lot of exercise to run away, and that's where we might feel kind of those sweaty palms or those butterflies in the stomach, and it's our body preparing us to go and move and do something. But sometimes we freeze up and we just feel a little bit stuck, our minds go blank, but usually one of those three responses is what kind of happens to us when we do sense danger and we do feel that stress. Now, as part of this anxiety, what happens is our brain releases chemicals called cortisol and adrenaline, as well as others as well. Now, this is what we feel, that kind of really heightened anxiety. This is what's kind of causing that, and it's not very good for us in the long term. So it is something that we do need to try and manage and get control over. Obviously, much easier said than done, but there's loads of strategies we're going to talk about today to try and help us with that a little bit. But it's also a good thing because it is there to protect us. So we want to have that alarm center there, and we want to have that rush of cortisol and adrenaline in certain situations. So for example, if you were stood in the middle of the road and there was a bus coming towards you, you wouldn't want to be kind of operating from that logical part of your brain and kind of thinking through those steps of how many steps should I take to get out of the way of this bus? Should I move forward? Should I move backwards? You don't really want to be using that part of your brain. You want that alarm center to trigger, and you want to feel those heightened feelings of anxiety, because that is what's going to get you out of the way of that danger as quickly as possible. But where it becomes an issue, I suppose, is when we are feeling those feelings when there is no danger there, and sometimes our brain is like playing it's kind of like it's working against us sometimes, and it's trying to protect us and it's telling us that there's danger there. But actually, when we think about it logically, there is no danger there, but it can be really tricky to kind of balance those two parts of your brain. So those parts of the brain that I'm talking about, I've already mentioned the limbic system there, and we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about the frontal part of our brain. Now, a great way, and there's lots of different kind of metaphors and analogies that people use to describe how your brain works. A great example of this is from Dr. Steve Peters and this book here that you can see on the right. And he talks about having kind of two different kind of elements in your brain, I suppose. One is a chimp and one is a human. So the chimp brain is that limbic system that I mentioned before. That's where that alarm center is that triggers that response. The human brain is that frontal lobe, and what that is that's like kind of your rational, logical part of your brain. So when you're feeling calm, you're operating from there. And when you're feeling stressed or anxious, you're operating from that chimp part of your brain. And as I said, there's certain situations where you do want to be operating from that chimp part of your brain, but there's also certain situations where we would prefer to be operating from that human part of our brain. And it's all about having a balance and being able to regulate between the two. But this can be really, really tricky, especially when there's kids thrown into the mix and all of the kind of worries that come along with that. It can be really, really tricky to kind of have that regulation between both parts of the brain there. So in terms of kind of signs of anxiety and what to look out for, some of these are pretty self-explanatory, and you probably know this already, but general feelings of tension, worried thoughts, intrusive thoughts as well, or concerns, and certainly something that links in with parental anxiety. So not necessarily anything might have triggered that thought, it's just a kind of what if thought that just pops into your head. General feelings of dread, a general sort of nervousness, that sense of impending danger. Like sometimes we might feel like something bad's going to happen and you can't really put your finger on what it is or what's caused you to feel like that, but you've just got that feeling like there's danger coming. So they're all kind of those internal sort of signs, but you also do, we will get physical signs and symptoms, and it's linked to that fight, flight or freeze response. So it might be, you might be someone who kind of gets sweaty palms when they're feeling anxious. You might get a bit of a headache, you might get a bit of a tight chest, you might feel those butterflies in your stomach, but we will get physical responses that come along with that anxiety too. Sometimes it's dizziness, sometimes that kind of cortisol, adrenaline, it can actually affect our vestibular system, which is like our sense of balance, and that's what can cause dizziness for some people sometimes, but it is different for everyone. But you will recognize some of those signs yourself, and obviously the more experience we have with anxiety, we start to be able to recognize some of those signs ourselves. And when we can recognize those signs, that's a good thing, because that's when we can then start to put some of the strategies in place. Now that's kind of anxiety in general, and sort of what anxiety is, where it comes from, to kind of give you a little bit of a background as to how your brain's actually working, I suppose, when you're feeling anxious. Now, Tracy is going to talk to you a little bit more specifically about parental anxiety and kind of how that looks and some of the things that come along with that. So I'm just going to hand you over to Tracy, who's going to talk through that.
So I suppose first of all, what is parental anxiety? So most parents and carers are going to experience anxiety at some time. There's certainly lots for us to worry about as parents. And for some parents and carers, parental anxiety can really impact, it can have a significant impact on their emotional health. We tend to go through fluxes as parents of anxiety, but for some of us, it can be ongoing issues. It can be something that we're always worried about, and it can include things, worries about our child's development, for example. It can be around their health, their emotional well-being, academic attainment as well can be something that we stress about, their peer relationships and friendships. Are they sleeping enough? Are they eating enough? We have lots and lots of things that we worry about as parents, and it can often lead to us being overprotective or avoiding certain situations, might have some negative thoughts sometimes, and as Arron's just been talking about then, we can often sort of have physical symptoms of anxiety as well. In addition to that, so that's parental anxiety in general, but for some of us, for parents and carers of children who have maybe some additional support needs, often sort of anxiety is just part of our everyday process when we're having to navigate our unique journeys with our children, really. And as a parent of two neurodivergent young people, that's certainly my experience. It's often for us, for parents on that journey, it's often we're overwhelmed by the systems that we just have to navigate, and those what if. So what if she or never develops a communication? What if he can't live independently? What if he can never go to college? What if he never gets a job? What constantly sort of got those what ifs when we're sort of parents of children and young people with additional needs, and that's of children of any age, not necessarily when they're younger. This is an ongoing thing. It could sort of occur from a young age and travel up right through into adulthood, or it might be something that becomes apparent as our young people are getting older as well. And as parents and carers of children with additional support needs, there's always that underlying anxiety about what is the next challenge. Because what tends to happen is we identify a need, and that's not just the end of it. It's not as simple as we know what our child's support needs are. Often we might sort of have ongoing battles in terms of being able to get those support needs supported, and maybe identify the best educational sort of placement, or how we're going to address health challenges as well. And it can be really, really overwhelming. So as a parent, as a carer, we are constantly anxious. You may as well experience that sort of dreaded feeling of, if you're a young person, maybe get overwhelmed in school, for example, and you're sort of just worried about that call. Is that call going to come from school, that you're anxiously waiting for it all day as well. You might sort of worry that your child is isolated and doesn't appear to have friends as well, and maybe constantly worried about what are their needs, what is their future going to be like, what is their physical and emotional well-being needs. And by doing that, what often happens is, as parents, whilst we're spending all that time sort of being worried, being anxious for our young people, we often neglect our own emotional health. We often neglect our own mental health. So just in terms of some of the signs of parental anxiety, what we might be seeing. So for some of our young people, for some of us as parents, we may sort of be overprotective. Okay, that meerkat parent I often think of us as. I've certainly sort of been that parent where I'm always hyper vigilant, on high alert. If I took my daughter to sort of an environment where there was lots of other children, I was sort of up and never relaxed. I was always watching and sort of trying to make sure that she was safe, and she managed those interactions with her peers okay. We often experience sort of an intense worry about our children and that causes that protective feeling. We might try and manage all perceived risks to try and just avoid them becoming upset or hurt as well. And we might just try and micromanage and overmanage their physical and emotional safety. And that means that maybe we're not letting our children out of our sight, we're not letting them go anywhere without us. We may sort of check in with them all the time. If we are separated from them, checking that they're okay. And then potentially, we're risk adverse. We're not letting our children, our young people, take any age appropriate risks. When we think about catastrophizing as well, for some of us, and again, I've been this parent, always expecting the worst, and worried that something's going to happen to upset them, worrying them that they might hurt themselves, having frightening thoughts relating to our children as well. So that can be that sort of getting caught in that negative cycle of thoughts can be something that happens for us as well. We might find ourselves avoiding situations. Again, I can speak from experience with this. My daughter would often get overwhelmed in certain situations. So I found as a family that we often tried to avoid certain situations, which then meant that as a family, what we were doing was becoming significantly more reduced. We might prevent our children sort of taking part in activities because we are worried about them being upset, or we are worried about them being hurt, or we are worried about them being overwhelmed as well. We could be worried about what we perceive as risky experiences. We could be worried about our young people being bullied as well. And so just thinking about us avoiding situations and sort of not living our life to the full because we're anxious about what may well happen. Another thing that we can often try and avoid through anxiety is if we think other parents are maybe criticising or being sort of having negative thoughts about how we parent or how they perceive our child, if they don't fully understand some of the challenges our children might have. When we think about persistent worry as well, so we might see excessive worrying over minor things, what might be minor things to some people may sort of become something, a sort of big issue for us, something that we're really stressed over. We might not be able to switch off or relax. We might always be sort of thinking about, certainly for me, I know a lot of planning's involved in my day and anything that I do with my children. So it might be that, you know, you're not able to switch off, you're constantly thinking about what needs to be done, how you need to prepare, and so just not getting that opportunity to relax. You might not be able to then, it might impact on your ability to concentrate. You might have challenges with sleeping. You might feel irritable. You might feel tired. May impact that on your memory as well. Always sort of feeling on edge, feeling a little bit wound up, and have those racing thoughts, just worrying about the next day and the future. And naturally, you know, if all those things are going on for us, naturally then we can expect to feel exhausted. So, you know, you may be experiencing chronic fatigue, you may be feeling sort of overwhelming physical, emotional exhaustion. Again, you know, just feeling irritable, feeling frustrated, and as a result, we might be experiencing low moods as well. So if we think about some of the triggers and the worries that might cause this anxiety for us, excuse me. So again, like I said, you know, all parents will worry about their children. But when our children sort of learn or think differently or have some sort of complex health needs or need any additional types of support, then our worries are often heightened. So one of the big things I know certainly as a parent that I worried about was those developmental milestones. So all our children are measured by health professionals, by education professionals, in terms of what is the expected developmental progress. For us who've got children who have additional support needs, those milestones might not necessarily be appropriate and actually can be anxiety inducing. You know, if you feel as if your children are being measured up to something that isn't appropriate for them, then that in itself can cause anxiety. A lot of our children with additional needs, with additional support needs, they follow a very different sort of trajectory in terms of their developmental milestones and will develop at a different pace. So quite often for our young people, they don't sort of fit neatly into the expected milestone criteria. And as a parent, especially when you're new to it, I think certainly for me with my second child, I was far less anxious about it, but certainly with my son, when he first started having his challenges and he wasn't meeting them development milestones, I certainly found that a sort of anxiety provoking and something that I was really, really worried about all the time. Physical well-being as well, you know, we always worry about, you know, are our children physically active? If they are, if they're not, you know, is that because they're not able? And for some of our children, you know, they may have some physical challenges. They may experience sort of things like DCD, dyspraxia, developmental coordination disorder. Is that impacting on their physical well-being? Are they following a healthy diet? For some of our young people, again, speak from experience, for some of our young people, they may have challenges with certain food types, certain food textures, may have a limited diet, may have a restricted diet, may not get those internal messages to tell them that they're hungry or they're thirsty. Or on the opposite side, like the flip side of that, you know, for some of our young people, maybe they're overeating, maybe they're not getting them signals to let them know when they've had enough to eat or had enough to drink as well. In terms of long-term health conditions as well, so for some of our young people, you know, they may have health conditions that significantly affect them. We may be backwards and forwards to appointments. There may be lots of hospital appointments and paediatric appointments. You know, again, the stress, the anxiety that can bring with it. Sleep as well, let's not underestimate the importance of sleep. Again, as a sleep deprived parent, you know, it's my daughter, my youngest is now 12. My eldest son, who's got sleep challenges, is nearly 30. So, you know, 30 years of some sort of sleep challenges within our household, and the impact of that can be significant on us, you know, so let's not underestimate the importance of sleep. Emotional well-being as well. So for some of our young people, they may really struggle with their emotional health. Certainly we've seen that an escalation in that with the pandemic. You know, we know that lots of young people are needing lots more support around their emotional health, but as well, you know, in terms of some of our children being isolated, if they are having challenges with developing social interactions, friendships, peer relationships as well. For some of our young people as well, do they experience overwhelm in certain situations, certain environments? Again, something I can relate to. For my children, they often have sensory needs, which means that they often become dysregulated in certain environments, struggle with certain noises, certain textures, certain touch, unpredictable touch, and that can often be very distressing for some of our young people. We think about them in terms of navigating school, busy playgrounds, busy corridors as well. So thinking about school in more detail, you know, as well for some of our young people in terms of school transitions. Are you worried about how they manage transitions? Do they struggle with transitions in general? But we're coming to the end of an academic year now. Are you worried? Are you anxious about the fact that you know they're going to have to change class and that's going to be something they struggle with, or change from sort of primary to secondary school, for example? Are they going to have to, the expectation that they're going to have to travel to school independently? Is that something that you're anxious about? The educational demands as well, and the pressures. So if you've got a child with unidentified learning needs, you know that they need additional support, but that hasn't been picked up on yet. What that looks like. Again, is that what's causing you anxiety for your, you know, around your child? And because you know that they've got sensory needs, do you worry how they're going to cope with the noise levels, different teaching methods as well, crowding in corridors? Are they going to get the breaks they need? Are they going to have to deal with queues? How are they going to manage in lunch times? All these things as parents are everyday things that our children sort of might need support to navigate, and we are worried about, we are anxious about whether or not they're getting the support to do that. And as well in terms of friendships, so, you know, I've mentioned, do they have challenges with sort of maintaining or developing those friendships? Have they got a friendship or a peer group that they can connect with? Sometimes for some of our teenagers, the complications around those teenage relationships, not being invited to events, those types of things can cause us a massive anxiety as well. Then when we think about diagnosis and additional needs, so for some of our young people, you know, when we identify that there is potentially some challenges that they might have, do we understand what those needs are? If we understand them, do other people, the people around them, family members, friends, education professionals, do they understand what those additional needs are? Do we need to navigate an assessment process? Does there need to be some sort of diagnosis completed for our young people? Are you sort of having to have a fight to sort of get that assessment and that support? Are you feeling isolated because your friends and your family don't understand because they've not necessarily got children who've got those additional support needs as well? And then in terms of independence, so we again having that anxiety for our young people, just always thinking, you know, will they be able to live independently? Will they be able to live on their own? Will they go to college? Will they go to university? Will they be able to get a job? And those sort of bigger questions in terms of the long-term future as well. Will they ever have a partner? Will they have a family? And the big question, and certainly the biggest question for me as a mum, is, you know, for my children, certainly they've got learning needs that are going to need support for their whole life. So what's going to happen when I'm not here? What happens when I'm gone? So just if we think about that, we put it all together, massive anxiety as parents and carers, but we have got some tips and ideas that might be able to help. So like I've said, you know, unfortunately, anxiety and stresses often comes part and parcel with parents, and then particularly for us as parents with children who have those additional support needs. There's an endless list of things, you know, that can cause parents to worry, and those constant battles that we might sort of have, which no wonder we're often feeling overwhelmed, we're feeling stressed and anxious at times. So what we need to think of is some practical ways that we can try and sort of alleviate that anxiety somehow. So if we think about, I always say knowledge is power. I think one of the most important things that I ever sort of come to as a parent was about knowing that having knowledge and having understanding of whatever the challenge is can reduce anxiety. So if we gain an understanding of our child's condition, if we gain an understanding of the diagnostic process, if we gain an understanding of how assessments are completed, what that process might look like, for example, then it just means we know what to expect. We know if something isn't sort of being done as it should. We can challenge things we don't agree with. And that's not just around diagnosis, that's not just around assessment, but if we think about education, if we think about recognising support needs, if we think about needing to understand the education healthcare process, if that's a route that we might feel we need to go down for our children, having an understanding of sensory needs and how that might present for your child if they've got some sensory differences, you know, having a really good understanding of that and how you can support those sensory needs. Thinking about transition, what types of transition does your young person struggle with if they do? You know, is it everyday transitions from activity to activity? Is it bigger transitions, environment to environment, or when we're looking at changing things like from one school year to the next, or from primary to secondary school? But understanding how that translates for your child, understanding how that presents for your child, then we can look at how we can support that the best way we can support it. Always base everything on facts, not fiction as well. So remember it a bit earlier, I was talking about those what if questions. Quite often we've got those sort of worst case scenario thoughts in our mind. So try and sort of think about facts. What is happening? What are the challenges? How can we support it? Facts, not fiction. Proactive problem solving as well. So being proactive in being able to identify what the challenges are and being able to come up with a plan to do that. It's a really, really task orientated coping strategies, basically. Really, I find it really helpful to sort of be structured in terms of what I can do, what can I control and what can I change. And also, if we can just try and identify, just take a minute to stop and think, what is it that's making you anxious? What is it that's causing that anxiety? What is in my control? What isn't in my control? And come up with a plan in terms of how we can respond to how we can sort of, what can we manage that we can control? Stay in the present as well. Try not to sort of focus on the what ifs, like I've already said. Routine and structure, again, live my life with routine and structure. I think it keeps me sane. So having those schedules, having those timetables, being organised as well, breaking tasks down. We talk about doing these things for our children all the time. If you've ever done any sort of presentations, any workshops on supporting your young people, then we talk about schedules and timetables and organisations and chunking tasks down all the time, and yet we don't tend to do it for ourselves. So maybe let's just sometimes it can take a little bit of time and effort to put those things in place, but if they actually do help, it can actually reduce time and reduce anxiety in the long run as well. If we think about the amount of demands that are placed on us as parents, it makes sense to be able to plan and organise as well. Decide as well, triage a little bit, you know, decide what's the priority, what's the most important thing, what needs to be addressed first. Delegate as well, delegate some responsibilities. And now again, you know, sometimes as parents and carers, we're reluctant to ask people to help. We are more likely to sort of get on with it and do it ourselves. But delegate responsibilities, sort of don't be scared to ask. I certainly know that other people would ask me for support and they would expect us to ask for help as well. Plan ahead. So, you know, one of the big things, if you have got children, if you are worried about how they're going to cope with new environments, transitions, big changes, again, you know, if we're worried about that, let's be proactive in managing that. Let's plan ahead. Let's get some pictures. Let's get some social stories. Get some facts about what's going to happen, about new places, and make it unnew. I always say, you know, who's going to be where, what's going to happen, how long is it going to be there, and have a think about what tools would be helpful as well. I always have a backup plan. Try and plan ahead about how to deal with anything that's a triggering situation when they arise. In terms of yourself and your sort of your reporting your own sort of thoughts, writing a journal, that can be helpful in reducing and managing that anxiety. So if we think about writing in a journal, it actually can be quite therapeutic. So just jotting down any worries that you might have in a journal. You might be in an online sort of blogging account, but it can just help you to sort of emotionally dump anything that's troubling you, really. So maybe try keeping a journal. Often as a parent, we keep things bottled up inside, so that can be a nice way of just externalizing that. And then social support as well. So quite often as parents, and certainly as parents of children who have additional support needs, sometimes we can feel isolated. Sometimes we can feel other people that our friends, our family, don't tend to understand potentially what we're managing from support for our children. So think about local special needs parent groups, think about, it could be online, it could be in person. Knowing that you're not alone can certainly help you feel better with those anxieties as well. Talk about how you're feeling. It could be that it's a parent group, it could be that you've got really good friends, it could be that you've got a family support network. Whatever that is, connect with others, have a break, and sort of take some time for yourself. Arron's got some more suggestions as well that might help.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Yeah, some brilliant ideas there. And then obviously just from everything before that, so much to worry about. There's so much going on. But there are little things that we can do that, none of them are going to be a magic fix for any of this, but they will kind of ease some of those worries and, trial and error different things and see what works for you. Now, ironically, one of the things that really does help is sleep, and having a good sleep structure and a regular sleeping pattern. But obviously, as we've already discussed, this can be really difficult and can be one of the kind of the causes, if you like, of parental anxiety, and it can actually be the side effect of parental anxiety as well, is not being able to sleep because of all those worries. Now, so it's a lot easier said than done in terms of getting a good sleeping pattern together. There are some tips and little things that we can try and help if we do have trouble with sleeping. Now, I'm going to talk about a few things to do with this really. Firstly, lots of research now is looking into the effects of blue light on sleep, and this is basically the light that is emitted when you're looking at screens. So if you're on your phone in bed or tablets and things like that, it actually can affect and disrupt our sleep. So often what's recommended is at least an hour before bed, trying to get rid of that screen time there and minimize that and reduce it before we go to bed. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of this. I'll be sat scrolling on my phone as I'm sat in bed and then try and sleep 2 minutes later and wonder why I can't sleep. But it is recommended to try and avoid that screen time just before, when we're sort of getting ready to go to sleep. Another thing as well, which can be really hard depending on the space that we've got, and certainly something I found difficult during COVID was because I was working from home during that time, which I hadn't done before, and my bedroom basically became my workspace as well, and that really didn't help with my sleep because I wasn't really associating that room with relaxation and sleep. It was associated with stress and work. And if we have the space, being able to kind of dedicate that bedroom just for sleeping, and everything else in terms of workspace and things like that, trying to keep that separate and away, and we will just associate that room with sleep. Another thing that is often recommended as well is if you are someone who finds it difficult to get to sleep, the longer we stay sort of lying in bed awake, we can't sleep, the longer we stay there, the more we're going to associate that bed with not being able to sleep. And it's often recommended that we actually get up and go and do something else, and not necessarily, go and run 10k or anything like that, but just get up and do something nice and calming and relaxing. And it might be that you just listen to some calm music downstairs. It might be that you go and read a chapter of your book or something like that, but just something that's going to be relaxing away from that bedroom. And then we can go back when we're feeling ready and feeling tired again, because the longer we stay there not going to be able to sleep, the more we're going to associate that room with lack of sleep. Another thing that Tracy's mentioned as well that can help with sleep too is journaling. And if we do have those consistent, persistent worries, and we're going to bed with all of this stuff on our mind that Tracy was mentioning before in terms of parental anxiety, sometimes just writing those down on a piece of paper and externalizing them can help us to process some of those worries, because when we're stuck in that chimp brain and we're stuck in that emotional part of our brain, we can't really think logically about it. So our human brain might well tell us that, no, you don't need to worry about that, because there's no evidence to suggest that terrible thing that you're thinking of is going to happen. There's no evidence to suggest it's going to happen. But our chimp brain doesn't work like that, and our chimp brain telling us that it could happen. But sometimes just externalizing it and writing it down can just help to offload that a little bit and help us to sleep. So a few kind of recommendations around that as well. And one thing that does help us with sleep too, but also helps us with our well-being and helps to reduce some of that anxiety, is exercise. So we do have a regular exercise routine. It is going to help our sleeping patterns, and it is going to help to reduce some of that anxiety as well. When we do exercise, physical exercise, we release endorphins, dopamine, all these chemicals that make us feel good, and it helps us. It's a bit of an outlet for some of those stresses and worries. And I often find if I am stressed or anxious about things, if I go for a run, for example, or even go for a walk, it doesn't have to be kind of too strenuous. Even just going for a walk, you're getting that kind of physical relief in terms of the exercise and the endorphins and everything that I've mentioned, but it's also an opportunity to kind of think things through and process your thoughts and process some of those worries and try and think about it a little bit more logically. Obviously, again, like we've said with sleep, much easier said than done when we've got really busy schedules at home. So, it doesn't have to be, 2 hours in the gym every night, even if it's just maybe just before you go to bed, just going for a little walk around the block, or even when you get in, before you kind of start your evening routine, little walk around the block or something like that. Little and often is much better than not at all, and it is going to help reduce some of that anxiety. Now, breathing techniques can really help too. When we are breathing deeply in through our nose and out through our mouth, when we are taking time to do that, that adrenaline, that cortisol, it is going to reduce that, and it is going to help us to calm. And when we are operating from that chimp part of our brain, breathing and relaxation are things that help us to start to operate from that human part of our brain again. And it's when we do start to feel calm and we do start to feel a little bit more like we're not catastrophizing and we're not kind of thinking of the worst case scenario, and we're able, as Tracy said before, to focus on the facts instead of the fiction. But if you find yourself focusing on the fiction, sometimes breathing techniques can help you to start to regulate the kind of emotional part of your brain and start to focus on those facts instead. And linked to that as well, one thing that I'd always say is when we're doing the journaling too, when you do find yourself starting to think about those what if questions, and it might be something that you're writing down before you go to bed, always ask yourself the question, where is the evidence? And sometimes that is enough to help us to kind of start to begin to let go of some of these things, is when we actually think to ourselves, where is the evidence? Often we find that for certain things there might be no actual evidence, especially when it's those what if questions. For lots of worries, we of course will have evidence, and there will be real reasons why we will be worried about those things. But certainly for some of those what if questions, when we start to think, what's the evidence that this is actually going to happen? If there is no evidence, that's when we can start to process it and try to let go of some of those worries. But there's lots of other ways of relaxing, not just breathing as well, and it's just about finding what's right for you. But trying as much as we can in the limited time we've got in our busy schedules to make space for yourself to relax and just have a moment to yourself, and really try and calm some of those thoughts down. And mindfulness is often something that gets spoken about, and basically all mindfulness is just taking the time to be present and taking the time to maybe just focus on one thing. We think about anxiety and there's so much going on all the time. throw parenting into the mix and parental anxiety, and there's just so much going on. We very rarely have the time to just focus on the present and just be present and focus on one thing. So meditation, for example, is a great way of doing this. It's not for everyone, and some people don't feel very comfortable with it. They find it difficult, but there's lots of other ways of being mindful of other than meditation. It's just about taking a moment to yourself to try and be present. With meditation, you'd close your eyes, focus on the kind of physical sensations, your feet on the ground. If you're lying down, you might be focusing on different parts of your body and how they feel against the ground, but it's basically an opportunity to try and not think about anything else and just be very, very present. Another good way of doing this, if you find meditation difficult, is something called a gratitude journal, and you might link this in with your kind of externalizing your worries before bedtime and things like that. A gratitude journal is basically just a way of externalizing the things and giving you a chance to think about the things in that day that you were grateful for, because especially when anxiety is in the mix, it's very hard to think about the positives sometimes, and there's so much going on, and actually that leads to more anxiety, and we start to feel guilty that we're not appreciating life and we're not appreciating all the wonderful sides of parenting that come, not just the anxiety. But it's really hard to focus on those things sometimes, and actually using a gratitude journal can help us with that. So all you do is you can pick a number. I normally do it with about 3 things. So before I go to bed, I just write down 3 things that I'm grateful for that day, and it doesn't have to be huge. It might even just be, I'm grateful that when I was thirsty this morning, I was able to get a drink of water. But just giving yourself the opportunity to actually to externalize those things and start to feel grateful. And you might link it to parenting as well, and grateful for some of the interactions that you've had with your kids that day. I mean, I put on Friday, I put just before I went to bed, I put, I'm grateful that the bin man came this morning to take my bins. And it was just something, I'd not had a particularly good day, but I was just trying to find something, and it does help us, and it starts to put things into perspective for you. So if you find meditation difficult, which is something that people do, it's just finding other ways of being present and taking time to just kind of be grateful for the now, and be very present. But as I say, it can be difficult, but it's just about finding what works for you. And obviously there's so much professional support out there as well. Witherslack group have got some fantastic resources. We've got so much stuff on our websites, around parents and children with additional needs, especially, and ways of kind of managing that and looking after yourself as well. There's so many great mental health charities out there as well, which, if put mental health in adults into Google and you'll find hundreds in this country. There's lots, and then specific things for some of the topics we've spoken about as well. So thinking about sleep, there's lots of great sleep organizations out there. The internet is a fantastic place for it's one of the many benefits that come with it, I think, is that all of these free resources that are out there to do with sleep, relaxation techniques, mindfulness, you can find it all out there. And I definitely would recommend seeking out professional support if it is something that you feel that you are really struggling with and you feel like you need to talk to someone. Of course, if you wanted to kind of get that sort of professional support, then definitely something I would recommend reaching out and looking into. Now, as I say, lots of ideas there. None of them are going to be kind of miracle fixes and can be hard to implement, but hopefully there's been a few things there from either what I was saying or what Tracy was saying that you can kind of take and think, well, I'll give that a go and see kind of how it works. But we're both very aware, how difficult it can be, and parental anxiety, as Tracy said, can be a really, really tricky issue. But I think to sort of finish off, it's so important, and the whole reason that we've created this session is so important to look after yourselves. And I always think of when you're on an airplane and they say put your own mask on first before assisting others, and I think it's the same with your well-being, and I think it's the same with your mental health. Is you're not in an effective position to look after the well-being of others until we actually are looking after the well-being of ourselves. And the more kind of we are doing that with ourselves, the better equipped we're going to be to look after the well-being of our children and young people. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining this session, and thank you to Tracy as well for her amazing input in the session, and so informative, and I certainly learned a lot listening into that section as well. So thank you very much. We really do appreciate you engaging with this, and we hope to speak to you soon and see you on the next one. So thanks everyone. Goodbye.